Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I am the director of the GPS Parent Series and thrilled about welcoming two favorites of ours back to GPS. The most recent book is The Seven Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, but we're going to learn all about how to create a self-driven child, how to advance motivation, how to reduce stress and build connection with your child. I can't think of a more important topic. We are so grateful when you give us the gift of your time, and we have an ask of all of you, and that is to please share this resource in your own community, with your own friends and relatives. Consider a watch party or a book read. Everybody's welcome. There's no registration, and that's our ask. Like us on social media if you're on social media, and join the community of the GPS Parent Series. Very quickly, I want to tell you about upcoming events that I know you'll want to circle your calendar about. Next week, we have a hybrid on November 12th. If you're in the area and can join us, we'll be at the College of DuPage at noon on the 12th, and then a virtual only at night at 7 p.m. We'll be talking with Kathy Adams and John Duffy about each of their books, Rescuing Our Sons, Restoring Our Girls. So some of the same topics we'll be covering today about building connection in these challenging times. Then the following week, we'll be covering a new topic. Drew Ramsey has a book about healing the modern brain, about the connection between food and mood. I hope you can join us on the 18th, noon and 7 p.m. virtual. And then Beth Hoff will be with us. She's a school administrator, noted school administrator, talking about how do we build these partnerships with schools and families. And talk about grades. We'll talk about behavior. We'll talk about school anxiety and school refusal. November 24th, it's a Monday, noon and 7 p.m. We'll also have an expert on school anxiety joining us. And then we go into December. Ethan Cross has a book by the title of Shift, Managing Your Emotions So They Don't Manage You. He will be in conversation with Jamil Zaki, who is the author of the book, The War for Kindness. So I know this will appeal to lots of you that are listening today. We've got very exciting news about this is an event where we will be giving away copies of the 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child. So you'll be glad that you joined us today. And without further ado, I want to introduce my good friend, Patrick McGill. He is the superintendent of Benjamin School District 25. He has the honor of the introductions. So think about your Q&A, think about your chat options, and think about how your questions will be addressed, and circle back. We'll see you at about 10 minutes too. Patrick?
Great. Thank you, Gilda. It's great to be here this afternoon. I'd like to do the introductions. Dr. William Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist and the founder of the Stixrud Group. He's also a member of the Children's National Medical Center and an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the George Washington University School of Medicine. He is in demand as a lecturer on executive functioning, anxiety, sleep, motivation, and the effects of technology on developing brains. Ned Johnson is the president and founder of Prep Matters. Prep Matters is an education company dedicated to assisting students in achieving success. Johnson also serves as a board member of College Tracks, an organization that supports first-generation college students, and the Safe Community Coalition, which provides resources to reduce stress, promote mental well-being, and empower young individuals to thrive. The pair have co-authored 3 nationally best-selling books translated into 17 languages, including The Self-Driven Child, What Do You Say? Uh, Talking with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home, and The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child. Their work has been featured in various media outlets, including NPR, CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, Washington Post, U.S. News and World Report, and many others. And we are honored to welcome Dr. William Stixrud and Ned Johnson back to the GPS community today.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gilda and Patrick. It's great to be here. So, the Self-Driven Child, our first book, which has sold over 1 million copies around the world, I think because the subtitle of which is The Science and Sense of Giving Your Kids More Control Over Their Lives. And the idea of all over the world, people feel, how do we feel things feel out of control? Want to have a stronger sense of control of their lives. And when this new book came out in March, the 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, we noticed that we started the book with the story about when we were lecturing about the self-driven child locally, a woman whose kids I tested. I'm a neuropsychologist. I test kids for a living. This woman came who I tested like three of her kids, and she came like to four of our lectures. And the fifth one she came to, I said, "Why do you keep coming? It's the same talk, mostly the same jokes." And she said, "Every time I come and hear you guys talk, I feel okay about my kid. I can calm down. Even I can put things in perspective. And then the next day, I'll talk to another parent whose kid's doing better than mine. Or I'll get a call from school. My kid forgot to turn something in, or he's behind on something. And I get all wound up again." And it turned out that we were her calm button. And the idea is that we think that the two most important things that we as parents can give our kids are, number one, the sense that they're deeply and unconditionally loved. And number two, a healthy sense of control over their own lives. And it's because a sense of control, it's good for everything. It's the key to mental health. It's the key to that healthy internal motivation that we want. Um, and the challenge is, as we give kids more control, Dad, you want to explain why it's challenging?
Sure, sure. I mean, first of all, there's always boarding school. But yeah,
Right.
when we let kids have the sense of control over their own lives that they not just deserve, but they actually need to develop into the people we want them to be, it means by definition that we as parents are ceding some of that control. And as Bill mentioned, a low sense of control is so doggone stressful. So the purpose of our books is to help make it easier for parents to move in this direction. And our most recent book, The Seven Principles, it's designed as a workbook with reflections and exercises, because ideally you'll listen to this talk or any of many other talks that the GPS puts on with wonderful speakers, and you hear this idea or that, but then you go back and you default into doing things just as Bill mentioned about this family of his. So the idea with these exercises is just to kind of put these practices into practice so they become more of your default setting rather than the oftentimes anxious and more controlling behavior that we often have. And our goal really is to make it easier for all of us as parents to feel that it's safe and it's right to trust our kids a bit more and to worry about them less, because it's good for all of us, for your kids, for you, for us as a family, and frankly for us as a society. So there's seven books in the principle. There's seven principles in the book. Rather, we're not going to go through all seven today because we don't have 3 hours for y'all. But we're going to try to touch on three of them, and then of course address questions that you have at the end.
Yeah. And the first principle, and it's one that we've been thinking about for a long time, is the idea that we think that as we, especially as our kids get older, that we should be thinking about ourselves more as a consultant to our kids than as their boss or the manager or the homework police. And I was lecturing about the self-driven child in Houston a few years ago before the pandemic, and I happened to mention arguably the most elite high school in the greater DC area where we live. And at the end of the lecture, this woman came up to me and said, I'm a psychotherapist at the Manager Foundation here in Houston, a really good mental health facility in Houston. She said, "We know this school in DC really well because so many of the graduates get into the top colleges in the country. But as soon as they get a B, or as soon as they realize that everybody here is as smart as I am, or as soon as they reach out to a girl and the girl ghosts them, that they crumble emotionally and they take a medical leave of absence and they come here for treatment." And she said, to the one, they don't have enough experience making their own decisions, setting their own priorities, solving their own problems. And so this idea that I think the goal for us as parents is when our kids leave home, we want them to be able to run their own life, which means that our role is to help them to figure out who they want to be, what kind of life they want, and the best we can, how to create the life that they want. And I got this idea actually pretty early in my career, right? When I used to do a lot of psychotherapy in addition to neuropsychological testing. And I was struck by how many the therapy clients I'd work with, the families I'd work with, the parents would say, "I dread dinner time because after dinner it's like World War III fighting about homework." And I learned in 1986 for the first time that homework doesn't contribute to learning in an elementary school. I thought, what's all this fussing and fighting about? And I saw a lot of underachieving kids, and it looked to me like the kids would have a tutor and a therapist, and teachers were reminding the parents, and a homeschool communication program. And so the adults were spending 85 units of energy trying to get the kid to achieve, and the kid was spending 15. It just seemed there's something wrong with that picture. And so with all this fussing and fighting about homework, I wrote an article in McCall's magazine on how not to fight with your kid about homework. And I just said, tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And one of my clients read The Self-Driven Child, which that's the title of the second chapter in Self-Driven Child. And she said, I just told my 8th grade son, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And then she said, first he hugged me. First he smiled, then he hugged me. Then he said, is something wrong with you, Mom? He was he was worried. But the idea is that you say, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. You're the most precious thing in the universe. I'm not going to fight with you about it. But also, I'm willing to help in any way I can. And if I can't do it, I'll find somebody else who can help you. But I'm not willing to fight with you. And I'm not willing to act like somehow it's my job to make sure that you can do your homework. I couldn't make you do it. All you have to do is flop to the floor. And so the first principle is this idea we're going to talk about today, is this idea of being a consultant. Ned, do you want to continue?
Yeah, and this can feel hard for folks at first, because again, you feel like you have a low sense of control. But a quick reminder, then you can't make your kid do his homework. I mean, if you're a freeze, are you going to duct tape him to a chair? And so we feel pretty strongly that both parents and educators really shouldn't unfairly task a parent with a job that's impossible to do. And it's a much better way to have a better relationship with kids, and it's actually a whole lot more effective. And one of the things that will happen so often when parents get really anxious and they're push on kids and push on kids and push on kids, not only do the kids spend 15 units of energy, but you end up with things like this student that I'll tell you about right now. She was a 9th grade girl. She was into nothing that her parents would want a 9th grade girl to be into everything that you wouldn't want a 9th grade girl to be into. Charming kid, adorable, smart, anxious, ADHD, depressed. So great potential, but not really doing so well right now. And I was her third organizational tutor, meaning the parents had exhausted themselves from trying to get her to do stuff, and she was tuning them out, so they were outsourcing this. Cool. So I could take a slightly different approach to this than maybe some people do. And at some point, I asked her, I said, if you don't hand something in or something doesn't go well, I said, who's most upset? Actually, I'd love to make this a group participation here. If you can put the answers in the chat or the Q&A. So I put that question to her. If things don't go well, who's most upset? What do you think her response was? And we'll see how quick people are on the draw. The parents specifically? If it was one or the other, which one was it? Oh, whoever that is, mom. In our experience, always mom. Mostly because mothers are usually the ones, kind of the CEO of the household, more replete perhaps with executive functions, or often kind of taking care of a lot of things, and oftentimes, spending more time with kids around homework. So here's the therapeutic technique. All right, kiddo. So after your mom, if something doesn't go well, then who's most upset? Then yes, it was dad. You guys got that one right. So then after mom and after dad, then who's most upset? This one's a little bit trickier. Any guess? After mom and after dad, who's most upset? Teacher, very good. Okay, you guys are A for, we'll give you an A here. A plus. After mom and dad and the teacher, then who's most upset? This one's tricky. So then she says, I think my tutor, the therapist. Oh, you got that, the therapist, and
This is a good group.
the tutor. This is a good group. You guys are sharp. And then it was a little my brother who hates the fighting, the dog. And I just looked at her, I said, my friend, where are you on this list? Oh, I'm not on the list. That's not my list. And so we have in our workbook, we also have all these things that we consider to be posted worthy. And there's a little post-it that says, it's more important for young people to get a clear message, a clear understanding of who's responsible for what, than it is for them to always do well. And she'd had so much of her school years had developed the sense that she ultimately was not responsible for this because someone else was going to pick up the slack. And we just feel we really don't want to be giving that message to people. It's super stressful to everyone involved. It really undermines their motivation. It's not what we want to do. So one more quick exercise. I'll turn it back to Bill. Are there things that you feel like as a parent right now that you feel like you as an adult, as a parent, are putting more energy into than your kid is, and you'd like to switch that, you'd like to turn that around and have them give more than they are, so that you can give less than you are.
Like a kid issue that they're working
Yeah,
harder
like a
to
kid
do.
issue. It's homework or hygiene or cleaning their room or, chores or, practicing piano. Are there things where you feel like you're kind of managing that and you wish your kid would manage it so you didn't have to? College, yep. Yeah, these are getting out of bed. Yeah, these are all, I mean, these are so good. I mean, and because, in many ways, these are adult things. And, a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old or, 11-year-old isn't going to do all these things well, but they do need to learn these things eventually. And so before I hand it back to Bill, just a quick reminder, and this may be hard for you to hear, but anything that is worth doing well eventually is worth doing poorly now. And Bill will take that and run with so that one of the, I guess, the first, if we talk about this, the first implication of this parent as a consultant is that we offer help and we offer advice. So, your room would be a little neater or if you done this, don't you think you'd get better grades? And the problem with that advice is not that it's wrong, because you guys are quite good at this. You're bright parents. You're obviously care about your kids, otherwise you'd be spending your lunchtime somewhere else. The challenge is, from a brain perspective, when we give people advice or help, even help that they don't want, well, we're going to get you a tutor, as opposed to, hey, would a tutor be helpful to you? When we offer help and advice that people don't want, it excites their stress response. The HPA, the amygdala goes nuts, and we get the, oh, sure, okay, what, yeah, which is just your kid being defensive because they're feeling like they're being controlled. And when you say, hey, I noticed that test didn't go that well, would it help if I spent an hour with you, maybe quizzing you next time on that? If a kid feels that, she can take it or leave it because it's offered openly, not coercively. They're so much more likely to not feel stressed and therefore so much more open to taking that help. And again, we offer this as an idea to you to offer to your kids only because we want you to be as effective as you can in helping kids. And our second book is all about the language of this. And one tool that can be really helpful with any kid is, after they've gone on about a test and didn't go well, or getting, ghosted by their friends, or didn't make the soccer team or whatever, after you express, empathy and sort of validate that they have reasons to feel upset, is to simply ask, is there a way that I can help you with that? Rather than jumping in with, well, what about this and what about that? It's wildly effective, and partly because it's wildly validating and disarming, because kids don't feel like you're forcing help on them.
Yeah, we call that the language of getting buy-in. Things like, I wonder what would happen if you just making it tentative. Yeah,
Hmm.
what I use a lot is for whatever it's worth. And I see a lot of young people that I want to influence them, but I know if I try, one of the things we know about trying to change people is if we try to change people who aren't asking us to help them change, what we get is conflict and resistance every time. And so I want to make it feel like I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to force you. So I say a lot, well, for whatever it's worth, and I'll run an idea by it. I want to make it tentative. And so in our second book, we talk about the language of a parent consultant, including the language of getting buy-in, but also the language of no force, taking force off the table. And and I was struck years ago. There's a guy named Ross Greene who became famous with a book called The Explosive Child. Um, and he works with he's always worked with very difficult, explosive, angry, rigid kids. And what he came to was telling them, look, I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to make you do things. And it struck me as a parent of young kids, it became very clear to me I couldn't make him do anything. And my 3-year-old son, when my son was 3 or 4, and I asked him to do something, he'd fight me on it. I'd say, Elliot, you're acting like I think I couldn't make you do this. All you'd have to do is flop to the floor. And then I just talk to him about it. Eventually I get him to go along with me. But I found that taking force off the table is so powerful. And I feel like in some ways I just have this Jedi mind trick, because parents call me and say, would you talk my kid into doing this or that? And I say, I don't believe in talking kids into things, but I'll talk to them about it. And as our first book came out, a woman, observant Jew, a Jewish woman, was really upset because her son was turning 13 and for a year had refused to do a bar mitzvah. And he didn't believe in God. He felt like a hypocrite. And she came to consult with me, and she'd read The Self-Driven Child. And she said, well, I think I know what you'd say, but can you kind of talk me through this? And I said, yeah, the first thing you tell him is obviously you don't have to do it. We couldn't make you learn your Torah portion. We couldn't drag you up in the bima. We couldn't move your lips. You don't have to do it. And also, I just want you to know that it's really important to me and your dad. It's important to your grandparents and it's important to your siblings, your aunts and uncles, and your friends. We want to welcome you to the Jewish community. And so, and I hope you'll find a way to do it. So 2 days later, after resisting for a year, this kid came back to his parents and said, "Okay, I'll do it." Now he negotiated. He didn't want to do it in front of the whole synagogue. He did it like on a Monday, or mainly kind of family, friends, a smaller service. But he did it after resisting for a year. As soon as we take force off the table, and you probably had David Yeager on the program, the author of 10 to 25, who talks about adolescents who need an organ transplant, who have a pretty hard regimen to be able to qualify for the transplant, be ready for the transplant. And the kids are 50% more likely to comply with the doctor's regimen. If you say, I'd like you to consider doing this, then this is what you need to do. 50% more likely to comply. So it's a big deal. And I'll just mention too, we have a chapter, we're going to talk about this principle. There's a chapter called Support Healthy Expectations. And healthy expectations are, I have confidence that you can, as opposed that you must, and you must, or there'll be some consequence. I'll be disappointed in you, or whatever. And I have confidence. It's not forceful. It's not coercive. It's healthy. It's supportive.
Part of the reason that's so important, I know you've had Jenny Walls as part of your community, and her work in Never Enough, that after poverty, trauma, and discrimination, the greatest source of stress for children is excessive pressure to excel. And nobody would willingly submit their kids to the first three, but somehow we feel it's a collective need, family need and cultural need to push our kids to constantly excel.
I'll say my favorite cartoon that I've ever seen. It's these two teenage boys walking, and one saying, God, I'm just so sick of my dad. He's constantly on my back about my schoolwork. He's always telling me, get those grades up. Last night I couldn't take it anymore. I said, get that salary up.
I would love to see what the response was.
Yeah.
The second implication, there are three implications of this idea of a parent to consultant. The second one is we want to support kids in making their own decisions. And we see this all the time where parents like, I need to figure out what school my kid should go to rather than making the decision with them. Should be doing this activity. They force tutoring on kids. They force therapy on kids. And as opposed to saying, as Bill mentioned and David Yeager, I think it might be really helpful. Can I tell you why? Can I walk you through the reasons why I think this might be useful to you? And part of the reason we want kids to make decisions about themselves is, one, we want them to own those decisions. If I make a decision for someone else, that person's likely to be invested in it not going well just because I told you it was a bad idea, Dad. Where, particularly for teen, if they make a decision and it was maybe the suboptimal one, if it doesn't go well, they're likely to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and keep at it to get it to work because they don't want to hear, I told you so, from mom or dad or any other adult. And most decisions, if they're decisions that are, we support kids in making decisions unless they're crazy, meaning that like 19 out of 20 people would say that's the worst idea I've ever heard. But most decisions aren't like that. They're 60-40, they're 55-45, they're 49-51, right? And part of the reason decisions like that are hard because decisions aren't made with a spreadsheet of pro cons. It's present value and future value, right? It's what matters to me. It's what matters to my family. It's what matters to my friends. So this friend versus that friend. These are very complex cognitive and, importantly, emotional decisions. And you can't make kids want what they don't want. You can't make them not want what they do want. And so they're trying to balance what they feel like, what they want, and also the rational reasons for things. And the good news is when they struggle with those relationships, And we help kids struggle with them by saying, listen, kiddo, it's your call, but I like to talk through the pros and cons so we get them all the information that we think they may be lacking. When you say, it'll be your call, but I want to talk through this, they're much more likely to hear our advice and hear our wisdom and hear our facts. But when kids have to struggle with the very complicated balancing of 17 different inputs, they're developing those executive functions for decision making, problem solving, projecting themselves in the future, thinking through consequences, putting things into perspective, all of those things that we so want adolescents to develop. And so it's not so much that kids deserve the right to make decisions about their own lives. Ultimately, it's that they need the opportunity to make decisions about their own life if they're going to develop the kind of brains that we want them to have. And from our perspective, one of the most empowering things that you can say to any kid, especially a teenager, apart from, I'm just crazy about you, is that I have confidence in your ability to make good decisions about yourself. And when you make a mistake, which you will, that you're going to figure out what the best thing to do is in that moment. It's a really powerful way so the kids don't, stay tied to the apron strings and hiding behind mom and dad and living in your basement until they're 27 playing video games. Not that that ever happens.
And I'll just mention that about a year ago, I was talking with a woman whose kid I never tested, but apparently I gave him some kind of pep talk when he was 17, who's now 35. And she said, he's the happiest person I know. She said, he didn't
Mm.
choose a life that I would have chosen for him. He didn't go to college. He's a rock and roll musician, and he picks up jobs to make enough money. But he's completely satisfied and fulfilled with everything in his life. And she said, his fiance says, she's the most confident person that she's ever met because he trusts his own decision. And our idea is when kids leave home, we want them to be able to trust their own gut rather than ours, trust our own judgment rather than ours, which takes practice. And the third implications of being a parent consultant, besides offering help and advice, not trying to force it, and helping and supporting kids in making their decisions, is encouraging kids to solve their own problems. And I did an exercise with this parent educator several years ago where we made up these scenarios. A third grade girl, she's the only one who didn't get invited to a birthday party, comes home really upset. Fifth grade, 15-year-old boy gets dumped by his girlfriend or didn't make the basketball team, really upset, comes home. And the first question that we suggested parents ask themselves before they go any further is they remind themselves, whose problem is it? Because we're wired as mammals to solve our kids' problems. But the challenge is the only way that they can develop that kind of confidence that they can handle hard things is by handling hard things. And when a kid is solving a problem himself, the prefrontal cortex activates. And whenever the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down the stress response. And you go into coping mode. And we want kids to basically develop a coping brain that when something stressful happens, rather than immediately picking up their phone and calling home for advice or freaking out or trying to avoid, they cope. They activate that prefrontal cortex, and they have to have enough of that experience developmentally to develop a coping brain. So the last part is simply that encouraging kids to solve their own problems with our support is necessary, but that's the only way they can develop that sense of confidence that they can handle stuff because they know that they have. Should we go on to the next principle, Ned?
Oh, I think we certainly should.
Okay. And so this another principle we're going to talk about is we call it teach your kids an accurate model of reality. And on another trip to Houston, I lectured to some faculty at this independent school and to parents. And at lunchtime, I had lunch with student government kids, the student leaders. And I asked them, how many of you want to be happy as an adult? And they all kind of sheepishly, raised their hand. And I said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And this one kid said, I think I speak for the rest of us, that if we get into a good enough college, everything's set. And I got, oh my God. I said, I said, has nobody told you about Laurie Santos, the psychology professor at Yale, who lived with Yale undergraduates in residential dormitories and was just struck by the fact that these kids got into Yale and they were miserable. They were so stressed, so anxious, so exhausted, so competitive with each other that they did not enjoy anything about being at Yale. And I tested two adolescent boys, two high school seniors in the spring of 2024. really nice kids, top students, outstanding athletes, got into really good colleges. Both are on anxiety on medication for anxiety depression. And I asked the kids as part of my interview, as I ask all kids, are there times when you feel really happy? And both kids said, I felt happy the day I got into college. They didn't say, I felt really great now that I got into college. I said, I felt happy the day I got in. It lasted one friggin' day. And so, and it's which is kind of a delusional idea about what makes people happy.
Yeah, I would add there's the what's called the DSM, which is the Handbook of Psychological Disorders. The DSM-5 that came out in the early 2000s had a new disorder. It's called shared delusional disorder. And so traditionally that'd be if my family and I, all had tinfoil hats while we watched television. And I might grow up with some unorthodox ideas about, how what the government is really up to or how the world really works or a moon landing or what have you. But we think about this a lot in places like your corner of the world and DC where we are, where a lot of people hold the idea that only people who go to highly rejective, not even highly selective, highly rejective universities will have a successful life, or that where you get into college is the most important outcome of high school and adolescence. And we would submit, and I'll say this, I'm a test prep guy. I help people prepare for standardized entrance exams, but I will shout from the rooftops every day, every week for the rest of my life, if needed, that the most important outcome of childhood and the most importantly adolescence and high school is not the university that you attend, but rather the brain that you develop and carry into adulthood. We were just at a school last week and talking with these middle school kids and saying, here's the deal, your middle school grades, they don't follow you to high school or to college or to life. But you know what will follow you? Your middle school brain. And so we want to take really seriously and really encourage you as parents to take really seriously the effects of stress hormones, the corrosive effect of stress hormones on developing young brains. And so we want to kind of collectively work against this myth that where you go to college is everything. I was at a really good local public high school 6 months ago. We were actually talking about Jonathan Haidt's book, and there were two kids, six class of kids, but two comments that stood out. One was a girl who'd recently moved here from Europe, and she talked about how much she loved soccer and sports and da da da. But she said, she shook her head. She said, here in the States, nobody does anything for fun. It's all about where you get into college, right? And, kids when I talk with kids who are athletes, they all started playing travel soccer at second grade or first grade or kindergarten. And this other girl said, we think about every moment of how we spend our time through the lens of what would a college admissions person think about how we spend our days. And it's not healthy, it's not fair, and it isn't necessary for your kids to be successful in the ways that they want to be.
Yeah, and it's just so inconsistent with reality. With reality in the sense of there's so many people, and I flunked out of uh, I graduated with a 2.8 grade point average, and flunked out of graduate school the first time I went. I got fired from my first job as a typist. I got fired from my first job as a neuropsychologist. Uh, and I've had
You're not
a,
really that good of a typer, Bill, if I'm completely honest.
no, well, I think I typed okay. I think I was just so anxious and uncomfortable at the time. I was uncomfortable to be around. But
Yeah.
and Ned, he tells this story, but he
Yeah,
was in a
yeah.
psych. This is one of the most upbeat, incredible human beings I've ever met. And
Yeah,
he was in a psychiatric hospital for 3 months in seventh grade. So the idea that somehow that what makes a good life is you always achieve at extremely high level. And kids who are always pushed, that chronic pressure to excel, it burns kids out. They maximize potential. In our view, they maximize their potential by creating a life that they're happy with. Because we see
mm.
so many successful people who are miserable, who are not happy with their life.
And And there's an exercise in our new book that has parents a whole list of things, everything from personal hygiene to your cleanliness of your room to grades and academic athletic performance, but also traits of kindness, and curiosity and grit, and optimism, and then having family, having good friends, do go to college, all these things that we as parents are thinking about, of things that matter to us for our children. And so the exercise is intended for you as parents to go through and rank these and say, how much do these things matter to you, of doing work that feels meaningful, of making really deep relationships. And then, and here's the fun part, have your kid go through and fill that out as well. What do they understand? What do they think you want for them or of them or from them? And regrettably, there is oftentimes quite a disconnect. The parents kind of tick off all the noblest things of contributing to the world and being responsible and what on and on. And kids typically say, grades, grades, college grades. And so that isn't meant to put any of you under a microscope, but really it becomes a beautiful opportunity to articulate in a way that is perhaps more clear. So when you're face to face with your kids, said, sweetheart, it's important, it's valuable that you do well in school, but these are the things that really matter to you, for you to have a happy and successful life, because the world that children are currently being raised in, they're getting all these messages, as the students that Bill talked about in Houston, that they should sacrifice everything from their happiness, their well-being, oftentimes their integrity, their relationships, on the altar of academic achievement. And we just need that to be, we need that. It's not that academic achievement doesn't matter. It's just that it's an and, not an or. If I may, Bill, can I talk about PERMA for a moment?
Yeah, do.
Um, so we love the work, a guy named Martin Seligman, who founded what's known as positive psychology. So the first 100 years of psychology are like, studying all the ways that people are miserable, and how do we reduce their suffering a bit. And he turned it around and said, why don't we look at the people who are doing great, who are really thriving, who feel just deeply alive and engaged, and just happy with the lives that they want. And so we involve this. We often lecture at high schools, and when we talk to the high school students, it's called creating a life you want. And so we think that it's really valuable to share with kids this science of happiness, that what really contributes to scientifically contributes to their happiness. And so here it is. And the exercise in here is you go through these things yourself, thinking about, how do I get my cup filled in each of these things? Okay. So P is positive emotions. And some of that's your wired glass half full or glass half empty, but things that we know that contribute to positive emotions, of gratitude practices and expressing your love for people and getting enough sleep and time in nature and meditative practices. And that great, psychologist Charles Schultz, that, happiness is a warm puppy, right? E is engagement. So when you're deeply involved and working hard at something, whether you're cooking or baking or small engine repair or sports or art or music or writing poetry, I mean, anything where you're doing it because it's meaningful to you, not to check a box or meet an expectation for someone else. We talk about in the self-driven child of the passionate pursuit of pastimes, not doing it to jump through someone's hoop, but because I really enjoy this. R's relationships. And the biggest longitudinal study on happiness that started in Harvard in 1938 finds that the single strongest contributor to happiness is the quality and depth and number of relationships that people hold. M is meaning. So something bigger than yourself, it's environment, it's social justice, it's a sports team, it's military services, things where you feel part of a whole, and I'm just a part of it. And then A is achievement. And so this is grades and awards and, and money. And there's nothing wrong with material things. We all enjoy them. It's just that it's 1/5 of the equation. And just like buying a truck doesn't make you less lonely, right? Academic and achievement-oriented culture, it doesn't fill our needs for engagement, meaning, and relationships.
And that part of the reason why I think we both think it's so important to talk to kids about this is that Laurie Santos' experience at Yale, where her course on after she realized how unhappy the undergraduates were at Yale, she started teaching a course in the science of happiness, and it quickly became the most popular class in the 350-year history of Yale University. Young people are desperate to understand, because the high achievement thing, that's not doing it for me. So Do you want to talk about the third principle? Do you want me to start?
Yeah, would you
Want to?
jump in?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the third principle we're going to talk about is the idea of becoming a non-anxious presence in your family. And I didn't make this term up, the non-anxious. I wish I did, but I got it from a guy named Edwin Friedman, who was a rabbi and a family therapist and a systems thinker. He worked with organizations ranging from families to corporations. And his conclusion was that virtually any organization works better if the people in charge are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. Uh, and if you think about it as a parent, it's much easier to soothe an infant, a crying infant, if you stay calm. If you've got a 4-year-old in a store who's melting down because you didn't buy him candy, it's a lot easier to deal with it if you stay calm. If your 15-year-old comes home and he says he's got 3 Ds, it's a lot easier to be supportive of your kid, to really help your kid learn from experience if you can stay calm. So it just makes sense. And
I tell a story when I was my
please,
son, who's now in graduate school and who is one of the loveliest human beings on this planet. He's just an incredible kid, but he is quite ADHD. He started college during COVID. And during COVID, the professors, take an extension, take all the time you want, take the couch, take any, and they would basically give anything to kids because they were just so worried about them all the while. But for a kid with ADHD, extensions aren't great because people with ADHD tend to work to deadlines. And so they piled up and they piled up and they piled up. And my wife and I were occasionally checking in on this and a little worried about this because we can't write papers for him. It's not the thing that we do, and I wouldn't know how to do it anyway. So we picked him up from college. We've driven after his first year. We're driving off campus, 5 miles off campus. I said, "Hey, I just wanted to ask, were you able to get all those papers handed in that were overdue?" There's a long silence from the back seat of the car. This voice says, "Well, I have 5 papers that are due in 48 hours, and if I get them all done, I think I'll be fine. If I don't, I think I failed 2 of my 4 classes." In what I consider a non-anxious parenting, triumph, I managed not to drive the car off the road or into a ditch. And as Bill mentioned before, simply asked him, "Is the way that we can help?" And I mean, part of me wants to be, "What are you thinking? You're out of," but that was not the thing to do in that moment. And I think because my wife and I kept our wits about it and stayed in this consulting role, non-anxious consulting role, I would say, he got this stuff done. To his everlasting credit, Mr. Last Minute, but it's a better energy to bring to situations.
yeah. And I remember working with a family very early in my career, and the dad was telling me about his 8th grade son who had polio, had a leg brace, and it didn't really bother him until 8th grade, where he wanted girls to like him. He couldn't play baseball anymore, and the dad broke down and crying and said, "I just want him to feel good about himself." And when he stopped crying, I said respectfully, I think we can more convincingly help him feel good about himself if we aren't worried sick about him. And I think Ned and I have felt for decades that when kids are not doing well, most of our most important work is on ourselves. It's on managing our own fear, our own anxiety, our own anger, our own guilt, whatever it is. Because when we can show up in our family as a relatively non-anxious presence, meaning not overly anxious and emotionally reactive, we can just be more thoughtful. We can support autonomy much more. We can support that sense of control much more because when we're anxious, we can trust kids more. So it's a really important thing. We also know that calm is contagious. I mean, stress is too. But a motto of the Navy SEALs is that calm is contagious. And because Navy SEALs have to go into these pretty charged situations and calm them down, so they practice inducing a state of calm and then radiating it so that and spreading it to other people. And we think about 2 ways of moving in that direction of being a non-anxious presence. One is we kind of cognitive strategies. So one being taking a long view. So not making what's called the fortune-telling error, meaning I can predict the future. And I've never been more panicked in my life than when my 2-year-old started to stutter. And she stuttered so badly for a week or so, she wouldn't talk. How could this ever be better? And I just envisioned the life of teasing and misery. And a week later, she started speaking normally. And I
Mm.
realized that all of our suffering as a parent, all of our anxiety and our worry, it's about the future. It's not about now. And so I wish that I've been saying the last couple of years, I wish I could implant into the brains of parents the circuits in my brain that have met that thousands of kids, and I could probably name 1,000 kids who were a
Mm.
disaster at one point in their life who turned out great. In fact, I got a Christmas card a couple of years ago. On the outside, it said, "You were right." I opened it up. It's these three siblings all dressed up with their spouse. On the parents wrote, "They all turned out great." And all these kids were a hot mess at one point. One kid tried college twice, was home by November 2 years in a row, nailed it the third time, is a successful attorney on Capitol Hill now. So part of it, taking a long view, trust as the prefrontal cortex develops, your kids they're going to be different every single year. They're going to be able to figure out how to do stuff they couldn't do. So know that all your worry about your kid is about now. It's about, because if I could assure you, I've seen 1,000 cases like this. They all turn out great. You wouldn't worry. Another is called radical acceptance. We'll talk for about another 3 or 4 minutes and then take your questions. But radical acceptance is simply because we don't really know. I've never seen a plan so somehow God's plan for our kids, that I assume that what's happening is where a kid's supposed to be. So if a kid is really struggling, I assume, okay, this is part of their path right now. And we're going to do everything we can to try to help them. But I'm going to make peace with it. I'm going to make peace with it as much as I can. I'm going to make peace with the fact that it's okay for him to be where he is right now. I'm going to make peace, and then I'm going to support him in every way I can. But I'm going to make peace with the fact that I don't know. For all I know, this is exactly what's supposed to be happening in his life right now. And I think that there's an exercise in the new book on facing and challenging your fears. So it asks questions like, what do you fear most if your kid doesn't do well? Or how likely is it? If he doesn't do well, how would you handle it? How would you cope with it? And could you make peace with it? And I think that we talk about some of the resources that I think that can help of moving this direction of radical acceptance. But these are a couple cognitive things that help. And Ned, do you want to talk about the second part?
Yeah, and I would add to that, part of the reason that's so helpful, right, is that if you can get your prefrontal cortex to be in charge, the executive function to take some charge over the stress part of your brain, then your non-anxious presence allows your kid's brain to do the exact same thing.
Mhm.
And kids who seem like they're mired in misery and lack of success, because the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. The more anxious they are, the more they avoid the hard work that they need to do. When we make peace with, and they can feel it's okay that this is a sucky for now. And it's okay. It's okay. I love you no matter what. We're going to get through this somehow. It lowers the stress that they feel, Jenny Wallace stuff again, Lisa D'Amour stuff again, and allows them to engage and doing the hard work to pull themselves out of the situation that they're currently in. The second part to this, of course, is the physiologically, what do we do to lower our own stress? And so every talk we ever give to kids, we always talk to them quite a bit about sleep and the impact on their brains. So it certainly applies to us as parents that the more well rested we are, the less reactive we are, because under sleep deprived people have 60% more stress hormones kicking around their brain. And so from our perspective, we need to have, for all the inflows of stress into a human nervous system, a family system, a school system, a political system, we need to have healthy outflows of stress, less bad things happen. My son, who had that same year with a misadventure with those exams, at the middle of that summer, revealed a brain tumor. He's great now, but holy cow, was that a run of it for the Johnson family. And two things. One, I remember going out to dinner with my wife 6 weeks into this adventure, and she said, "I've had three people ask me, how are you so calm about all this?" And part of it, we had a really great team, and we felt confident that there was a path through the woods here that can come out okay on the other side. But she also said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. Now, Bill's been for more than 50 years practicing something called transcendental meditation, which is a technique that allows you to experience deep sense of calm twice a day for 20 minutes. I've been at this for a couple decades. My wife at that point, probably for a decade. And She said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. And my wife is this incredibly capable person, but she's from a family that is a little, they're not non anxious. They're pretty neurotic, if I'm completely honest. But she said, I really think this allowed me to pull the stress out of my nervous system so that she and I could face this situation more courageously, which I'd like to think had the impact of helping him, sorry, the lights again, helping my son face this more courageously,
Yeah.
trying to get the lights going. And I had a conversation about this with my son about 6 months ago about trying to be a non-anxious presence. And as Bill said before, making peace with I said, in order for me to help you in the ways that I wanted to, I had to make peace with the possibility that after all this treatment, you're not the person who you are, or that you're no longer with us. We're driving along. Sorry, I can't tell the story without tearing up. And he pauses and thinks about this for about 30 seconds. And he said, I did the same thing too. And I said, really? I said, what went through your head? And he said, well, I told myself, if this doesn't come out okay, I've had a wonderful life. Goosh. And one of the things that all of us want for all of our children, I'll end with this on a more upbeat thing. We want home to feel like a safe base. Full stop. The world has a tendency to throw curveballs or wrenches at our children, and their friends ghost them. Somebody breaks up with them. A teacher is unkind. A coach is unfair. A million different things. So social media misunderstand a million ways that children can face adversity. And to borrow a line from Tina Payne Bryson, the recipe for developing resilience is adversity plus support. We don't have to provide any adversity to our kids. The world will do that. And one of the most profound ways that we support kids is with our own energy of being more in the direction of a non anxious presence and giving kids the message in every way that we can. And none of us is perfect, right? The only perfect parents are people without children, but giving our kids the message every possible way that we love them. No matter what, no how mad or messy their rooms are, their grades are, their lives are, and particularly for kids where things aren't going well, to give that energy is such a gift. It's the most likely thing to help kids back on the path that we and they want themselves to be on.
So we'd have to take questions.
Well, this is why we love to have you back all these many times that we have, and the future holds many more conversations with the two of you. I really think that you hit the nail on the head. You really got at the heart of what the challenge of parenting now and in the past, and maybe now more than ever. But it's this, to me, it's this conflict. As a parent, we want to make it better. We want to prepare the road for the child. And you have spent 50 minutes telling us, yes, you do want to help your child, but that initial, that gut feeling about smoothing everything for them is exactly what you don't want to do if you pull back and take the long view. I mean, I've circled so many, we want to help parents. After you talked about a family that came to 6 times. What a lucky family to hear this message over and over. But if we were going to put post-it notes around the house, the thing, they get their calm from us. Calm is contagious. Non-anxious presence. It's about changing your role to be a consultant, because if they don't feel that they have the control, then of course the relationship, we know, is so key, and part of that relationship is relinquishing your control to get the buy-in from them. um, I think about, you've thrown out so many favorites of ours as well. And I do think this is so difficult. And so I want you to help me with this conflict. But I do think reading the books over and over will be very helpful. And I think you need to hear it from different ways. And I like the way the two of you sort of do come at this with different examples. Julie Lithcott-Haynes said to me once, about when we do for our children, we're denying them the success of that. And that one really spoke to me. And I know so many of the things you've said will speak to someone who's listening in now. So how give me another example, another skill when I want to go in there and I want to go right to reassurance and I'm going to go right past empathy. How do I control myself so I don't go there?
Well, one thing is to recognize we as humans, as loving parents, we have something called a rating reflex, right? So if our child tells us about a problem, if Gil tells me a problem, if I tell Gil a problem, bright, caring people, your brain immediately goes into overdrive. What about this? What about this? Have you thought about this? This might be helpful. I know this person. What about this book, this podcast, right? Because your brain is full of solutions, right? Or oh my gosh, Gilda, I mean, it's the first quiz of the semester. You're gonna be fine. Look, you always pull it out in the end. You're so academic. Of course it'll be fine, right? And all of that is true. It's just that the first thing, it feels invalidating. Well, geez, if only you do one of these three things that just popped in my head, you wouldn't be in the situation, you dope. That's not what we said. But that's what an upset person feels. Or you're upset about that. Like you have the wrong feelings for the situation, which is not what we want to do. And so one tool for this is to use something. We borrowed this from a guy named Iran McGinn. It's a tool of reflective listening. And it's just, he calls it wigging. What I got is, so what you're telling me is that first quiz went really terribly and now you're really worried about how the whole semester goes. I get that. Of course, you wanted to have a good start to the semester, right? One of my favorite examples of this, my daughter was playing Minecraft, and she had been in this game with a friend for like a gazillion hours, and then the friend suggested to go on some adventure, whatever. And I don't understand the game well enough, but her friend had like invulnerability, and my daughter fell into a pit of lava and lost all the treasures that she'd spent hours making, and she is just so good, and she's going on and on and on and on, and I barely understand the game. And my son, who's 2 years older, comes down and says, well, if you do the blah 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 whatever. And she looked at him like I would throw you to the stairs if I could. She was so mad. And my wife nailed it with the perfect answer. Said, wait, your friend had invulnerability and dragged you on an adventure and you died and you wasted all the time. God, that sucks. And that's exactly what my daughter felt like. And just to have someone say, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's hard. And so we can use reflective listening as a tool. It makes people feel so validated when you repeat back to them as best you can, because you're conveying to them, I'm really trying to understand your perspective here. And it buys us time to come up with our own solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just add two quick things, though. One is that I think that we've gotten a lot of feedback, but just simply this line: is there a way that I could help? We've had people say this has transformed my relationship with my kids. Simply, and we're big fans of explaining to kids, apologizing to kids, it's saying stuff like, you know, I'm a mother, I'm a mammal, so I'm wired to protect and to soothe my young. And I know that you can't grow if I'm always jumping in and solve your problems. Is I want you to know that when you bring me a problem, I'm going to listen. I'm going to do the best job. I'm going to listen. I'm going to try to help you know. I'm letting you know trying to understand what you're saying, and I'm going to see if there's a way that I can help. But I'm going to try not to just jump in and say do this or solve it for you, because I know you need that experience to develop a brain that can cope with things. And so, like, just say stuff like that. And then if I start to leap in, just call me on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got two questions in the chat. How do you
Sure.
support a teen who's bright, but also has a too casual attitude about school and academics? They don't stress about late work or slipping grades.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, just I mean, so as Ned said, we have these four postulates of motivation. I think they're in their third book as well, which is you can't make somebody want what they don't want. You can't make them do something against their will. You can't make them want what they don't want. You can't make them not want what they want. And if you try to change them, and they aren't asking you to help them change, you get conflict and resistance. So the idea for me, from about 13 to my last semester in high school, school was my lowest priority. I was a C+ student. I did very little homework, and And I was a rock and roll guy. I was in a rock and roll band. I still am, but I just spent hours every night working on rock and roll, learning songs, working on my organ, this stuff. And when we learn from research by a guy named Reed Larson, that what develops that really healthy internal motivation, it's not dutifully doing your schoolwork. It's what he called the passionate pursuit of pastime, stuff where you're working hard to get better and better and better at something that's important to you. And I work with a lot of underachieving adolescents. And if I say to them, is there something that you work hard at besides video games to get better and better and better that you care about, whether it's sports or art or music or rock climbing or coding or whatever it is? If there's anything besides video games that I say, I don't worry about you. I assume at some point that school's going to become more important to you. I think it probably will. But I know that you're sculpting a brain that's going to be very familiar with that brain state of high focus, high energy, high attention, high effort, and low stress. And that's the brain state you want to be in most of the time as an adult. And so for me, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think it's fair to explain to the kids. I mean, your kid probably knows the benefit of working harder in school. He probably knows. So just telling him over and over again or trying to scare him doesn't work, because many kids who are underachieving, they don't want to work hard in part because it's the schoolwork makes them so anxious, they avoid it. The major manifestation of anxiety is we avoid stuff. So what I would say is I wouldn't worry about it very much for at this point. I think letting kids know the advantage of working hard, and for stuff that they work hard at, that's not video games, tell them you know they're sculpting a brain that's going to go that's going to know how to go pedal to the metal. Yeah.
The other thing, ideally, your son has come home or daughter has come home, and things hadn't gone well, and got a bad grade, the teacher gave them the stink eye, whatever. And ideally, they share with you that they're annoyed about something. And this is your opportunity not to say, well, you should have studied or whatever, and those things that you know to be true, but rather emotionally to take their side. Emotionally, gosh, you're really bummed about that, huh? I'd be mad too if I thought like the teacher was treating me like I was a dope when you know that you're not. Count, pause, 2, 3, 4. Is there a way that I can help? And because if we emotionally we say, well, you should have, we lose that opportunity, and then kids have a way of blaming us for the thing, rather than taking ownership of it themselves.
Yeah. And I'll just add the first principle in our new book, The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, is put connection first. Remember that your relationship with your child is the most important thing. And one way that can make a relationship toxic is arguing about the same thing over and over again, or fighting about a kid's schoolwork. And I think that I personally told my kids when they were very little that I could care less about their grades. Grades are not very predictive of how you do in life. And I'll look at your report cards if you want to. And I offered my daughter was in high school. Many of her friends were getting A. Their parents were giving them like $10 for an A, and I offered her $100 for a C, so she see it wasn't that big a deal. And so I think that
you take force off the table, right?
Yeah, expressing confidence is just expressing
Yeah.
confidence. I know that you can figure this out. If you want to do better in school, I'm confident you can. I'm willing to help you in any way. But expressing confidence, your kid can figure his life out with your help.
Yeah. And a lot of times kids who are avoiding school and all this kind of thing, it looks like they don't care. And that may be the case, but a lot of times they care too much. And they don't see a way that they can meet the expectations that they have for themselves, that their parents have. They have an older sibling who's super academic, and they could work really hard on things they don't particularly like or enjoy, or maybe they don't like Mr. Johnson, the teacher, but also they could work really hard, like max out effort, and go from grades that are sucky to sucky plus.
Yeah.
And then realize that's actually the ability of their cognitive levels, and that's too scary. And so they
That's a
don't.
good point.
And so they say, this is stupid and I don't want to do it.
Dr. Stixrud, you just mentioned, I'm going to mention it again, the family that came to hear you as many times as they possibly could. So this message resonated and resonated. Well, for us, we are so lucky that at 7 o'clock tonight, Central Time, you will both be back again. And so If you want to watch it again, come on back. If you want to call a friend or a partner, please do that. Let them know that this is a program. This is just not to be missed. Such wonderful information. Patrick, I know you join me in thanking these two gentlemen. It's just a treat when you come to GPS. There you go.
We love you. Thanks.
It's a treat to be with you all, and thank you, all the parents who are here. We know that raising kids is hard. It is, and if it weren't hard, it wouldn't be worth it, right? And the same thing for your kids. Becoming an adult is hard, and if it weren't hard, it wouldn't be worth doing.
Yeah. I tested a kid about 40 years ago. His mother was a humorist. She said, "We shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents."
Another Post-it note for the refrigerator. Thank you so much, Emma. We'll see you later today. Thanks
Great.
so much. Well, every time I hear you, you phrase it in another way that gets me closer to where I need to be. I love your three principles. Certainly, you opened that conversation about as mammals, we're wired to protect, but we really need to step back and understand that we need to have a different mindset because and I love this when you said, when you're talking about the importance of giving kids control, that if we want to dampen down their stress when they go to problem solving, what a perfect way to do that. And if we have the experience by pulling back and thinking big picture, we're able to do that much in a much more healthy way. And then the vocabulary, I love that book of yours. How do you say it? Phrasing it in just the way with the tone. You of course are in control, but you let me know when I can offer, when I'm here to help. Let me know. I love that. Is there a way that I can help? The second one about an accurate picture of success. If we focus on achievement, they need to know that success doesn't look like this, it looks like this. And of course, non-anxious presence. Someone once talked about how when your kid walks in the door, try to be like the dog who's wagging their tail.
That's great. That's great.
I love that. So let me ask you, that book again. I just love that book. Tell us some of the communication techniques that you feel so strongly about that parents get wrong.
So our second book is called, as Tom said, it's called "What Do You Say?" How to talk with kids to build, how to build motivation,
stress tolerance, and a happy home.
The first chapter is on the importance of building connection, of making, and our new book, the first principle is put connection first. And so we have the language of making connection, particularly the language of expressing empathy for kids and validating their feelings. So we use kind of reflective listening to let kids know, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. And the kind of validating language like, I think I'd feel like that too if that happened to me. What you're feeling is not crazy. And I think so. We talk about that. We talk about this idea of a language parent consultant, particularly the language of getting buy-in and the language of not forcing, which we talked about. We talk about there's a chapter on expectations, healthy versus toxic expectations, and it turns out that parental expectations are really powerful. But if the expectation is communicated, I expect you to achieve at this level, and if you don't, I'm going to be disappointed in you. I may take your phone, I may ground you, whatever it is. That it's toxic because it's coercive, and it's not respectful to the kid. The healthiest kind and the most effective kind of expectation is, I have confidence that you can. If you want to do this, I'm confident you can. I'll help you. And so it's the phrasing of how do we phrase our expectations to communicate confidence that kids can achieve, as opposed to a demand that they must. A few examples.
Yeah, and I would add to that what Bill was talking about in this first chapter about connection, using empathy and validation to do that, because logic doesn't calm hard feelings. Feeling understood does. And just a quick note, we talked about this during the noontime talk today, that parents, particularly people who are bright and educated, as I can tell just by looking at you guys on your little Zoom boxes, we have a tendency when people we care about bring problems to us, our brains just they immediately flip into overdrive, and you start thinking about solution, and you tend to want to share them, Or you can see that the way the kid is thinking about this, your spouse is thinking about this, sort of tormenting themselves, and you often want to try to get them to think about it differently. So what about this? I mean, Bill, did you talk to the teacher? I mean, well, gosh, maybe if you spread your studying out over 3 days rather than doing it all at once, maybe that would make things stick better. I suspect if a little bit more practice, you'd be better with the time management. You wouldn't run out of time on the SAT. Or, gosh, Bill, I mean, I know you're mad about the first quiz, but Jiminy Cricket, it's the first quiz of the semester. Of course, you always pull it off. You'll be fine. Trust me. It'll be great. It'll totally work out fine. All of that is ultimately probably helpful, but not as the first move. Because to the person receiving it, it can feel like, well, if only you had done one of these things that I just came to my head, you wouldn't be in this position, you dope. Not your intent, but it can feel that way. Or, Bill, you shouldn't be feeling what you're feeling. You shouldn't be upset the way that you are. If you were thinking about the way that I'm thinking about it, you wouldn't be upset and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Not the intent, but just recognize that as soon as you start trying to offer suggestions or solutions, you're falling into the writing reflex, and there's a decent chance that your great advice is not only falling on deaf ears, but is actually making your son or daughter or your spouse feel like, invalidating them. And all that you have to do, as Bill mentioned before, is reflective listening, is saying, oh my goodness, the first quiz, that must be a scary start to the semester, right? Or, boy, you didn't make the soccer team, even though, the coach didn't treat you fairly, or, even though you're on varsity last year, I'd be upset about that too. And this idea of repeating things back to kids, what they've shared with you, is a really good way to convey to them, you're trying hard to see things through their eyes. It also has the added benefit for you as a parent to buy you some time to think about the next thing that you might say. If you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a thing to say. Oh my gosh. So it's funny. I think I shared this earlier today. My son when he was in college, he's ADHD. He would procrastinate quite a bit, and he started college during COVID. And so they gave people massive extensions on everything, which for a person with ADHD isn't a lifeline. It's more of a rope to sort of like tie yourself up with. So we're leaving college, and I said, Matthew, I got to ask you, were you able to get those you had all those papers that were kind of hanging over your head? Were you able to get that stuff done? There's a long silence from the back seat of the car. Well, I have 5 papers, no, 6 that are due in 48 hours, and if I get them in, I'll be fine. But if I don't, I think I failed 2 of my 4 classes. There's of course a long silence in the front seat of the car. His mom, and me. We managed what I consider a parenting coup, non-anxious driving, managed to not drive into a tree, and so I just said, so you have 6 papers that are due in 48 hours, and if you get them done, you think you'll be fine. Is that right? Yeah. Is there a way that we can help? And he got them done. And I didn't help him write his papers. I offered all the time. Do you want me to look over? Do you want me to brainstorm, to improve? Do you want me to bring a snack? I mostly was just his room service. And he got the stuff done. And it's not easy, but that reflective listening and validating and not finding solutions when people's feelings are high, pretty effective.
Yeah. Tom, I know you've got a question. Oh.
What do you say?
I did the old mute thing. This is awesome, and I appreciate being able to listen to your session tonight. So I'm thinking, obviously, from a very school-driven perspective at the moment, for me,
Yeah.
and it's about partnerships between teachers and parents, right? So I'm hearing about how to let there be choice and control for your child. Is there any really easy starting points for parents and teachers to work together when there is that struggle with students in the classroom, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be behavior driven. It could be the academic performance. It could be whatever one party is seeing. Is there one simple approach that you often might say, like, why don't you try starting here? And I don't know. Yeah.
Well, one thing that jumps to mind for me is that, and this isn't meant to be a criticism, but it is an observation that well-intended teachers try to enlist the help of well-intended parents and say things, well, what we really expect of you as teachers is to make sure your kids do fill in the blank with anything. And usually that gets their homework done, read 20 minutes a night, keep their bag organized, whatever, whatever, whatever. And what those well-intended educators have effectively done is tasked well-intended parents with a job that's impossible to do. Because if your
Mm.
kid refuses to do his homework or doesn't want to keep his bag cleansed or doesn't want to or doesn't want to, what are you going to do? You're going to duct tape him to a chair. You're going to clockwork orange him. Another old reference for people. What are you going to do, right? And so it has the unintended effect of putting parents in a really powerless position where they've been told, in order for me to be a good parent, I have to make sure that my kid does fill in the blank. And then they spend their energy often fighting with their kids to get things done because one, they don't want their kids to not do well, but they also don't want to feel like they're bad parents. When I was there's a letter in The Self-Driven Child. So my son, again, ADHD, and he's the most charming kid in the world, but he's a little dreamy, and instructions that are given orally he would miss. If they're written down, he'd catch them. So we get this email from his math teacher. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I noticed that Matthew is showing up to school with his homework not unfinished, and he's rushing to get it done. He seems to be really stressed. Can you please make sure that he gets his homework, help him get his homework done at school? This is an opportunity. Dear Mr. C, thanks so much for writing. What you're seeing is the natural ramification of a boy who procrastinates. So, yeah, I think he is stressed because he's doing this last moment. We've made it really clear to him that we'll help him in any way that we can. And like I'm an SAT guy, I can certainly do fifth grade math. We'll help him in any way that we can, but we're not going to act like it's our responsibility for him to get his work done because this is his work. And if we do this, it won't strengthen him, it'll weaken him. We are here to help him in any way that we possibly can. But until then, we have confidence that he's going to figure this out. By the way, we know that he loves you as a math teacher. If you have specific suggestions for him or for us, please let us know. But in the meantime, we know that he likes you, we know that he likes math, and we're confident that he's learning from this and he's going to figure this out. And I think that this teacher had sent us the email because he thought he was going to get blasted when Matthew got a terrible grade, even though he's got a really good head for math. And we basically said, "You're not in trouble. This is part of the process. This literally is the natural consequence of a boy who's procrastinating. It's the perfect teachable moment. And if he has a teacher who's attentive, which he was, and parents who are attentive, which we are, and nobody's going to pieces about it, then the stress is his." And he has help all around him, and he'll either ask for help or figure it out. And lo and behold, he figured it out. His rehab counselor said he's doing great. No, I'm teasing. I mean, he's in graduate school now. I mean, he got more A's in this first year of college than I did in 4 years of college. It's an unbelievable mind. It remains ADHD, so he has to figure out how to use that remarkable but complicated brain, and I can't do that work for him. And if I were managing things from the outside, he'd be looking to me as his support system rather than himself as his internal structure.
I'll just add too, that I think one thing that I think could help teachers with communicating to parents in a way that feels respectful is that, your kid 1,000 times better than I do, and I'd love to share some observations with you. Okay, like that I kind of do. I respect that you're really the expert on your kid, who's the expert on himself. But I think that could be helpful as well.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
We keep coming back to the value of that respectful relationship with your child. It's in everything that you've said tonight, this afternoon, that if we get into an argument with them, with our wisdom and our experience, we're probably going to win that argument. But ultimately, what is the damage to the relationship? What is the hill that you want to die on? The listening, the empathy, the feeling what they feel. We're in this together. Not really. We can do this, can't we? We can do this. We can do this.
Well, the thing
Yeah.
about it, I mean, Bill mentioned before, that using, particularly like taking force off the table, it feels like a Jedi mind trick. It feels like a Jedi. I mean, one of my favorite things, and Tom, I'm sure you got to help families through COVID. My daughter spent 14 months online. I mean, it's terrible, dreary. And she was disconnected from her friends. My daughter's really sharp, so it's easy for her to be bored in a lot of classes. And this was, I don't know what month of COVID this was. And she said, "Do I have to go to class online today?" And my line, since she was the youngest one, is, "Listen, kid, I can't make you go to class. I'm, like, I can do this." But she was looking for me to, what I realized, she was looking for me to give her permission to not have to go to class.
Mhm.
And when I realized this, I said, obviously, I can't make you go to class. What am I going to do? But I also can't tell you that you don't have to go to class. One, I'm not your teacher. Two, I'm not you. This is your education. So you can decide if you want to go to class or not go to class. Totally on you, totally up to you. Whatever you decide to do, totally cool. She looks at me like, harumph, and she was mad because my daughter's totally a rule follower and she wanted me to give her the out from attending class. And so she kind of harumphs and off she goes and and then she sits down in class. And so the thing about some of these tools is they can feel really counterintuitive. But when you give kids more control over their own lives that they can handle, you don't let a 4-year-old run the household because it's overwhelming. But you give them the ability to control things that they can control, because there's so much less stress. They're so much more flexible in their thinking and so much easier to get along with. And it makes parenting kids so much easier.
And I'll add that and Ned and I were lecturing in Connecticut at a school in Connecticut last week, and after we finished, talking about this similar stuff, the first question was asked by a dad who said, "I feel like I got to go home and wake up my kid tonight to tell him I'm doing everything wrong and I'm going to try to do better," and and I think that many people who heard this message, we've had people raise their hand about 20 minutes into our talk and say, "What if I've already screwed my kid?" And so we think that it's really helpful to tell kids, I used to think that I needed to be on you about all the time about this, and not realize that's not very respectful to you. Because I think about it, I know you can figure out your life. And I think apologizing kids, when we realize that what we've been doing may not be the most useful thing, just apologizing. I mean, I'm old enough now that I can't remember the specific incidents, but I remember lecturing when I was in my 40s. I could remember specific times when my dad had gotten mad at me about something, and he'd come into my room later on, and he apologized to me. And I remember how much how loved I felt and how respected I felt. And to your point, Gilda, that the one of the great experts on relationships says that if we want kids to treat other people respectfully, we should treat them respectfully. And I think that just apologize, letting them, I used to think that I couldn't trust you to do this, or I used to think I mean, we see a lot of kids. I saw a 16-year-old recently who who was completely unmotivated, completely underachieving, extremely anxious, very unhappy. And the parents were monitoring with Life 360. They had cameras in the home. They're constantly on about his schoolwork. They were constantly monitoring his protocol. And they're kind of, why is he not doing better? Well, he has no control over anything. And we got to change his energy to turn this around and treat him like he has a brain in his head and he wants his life to work.
Take the do-over.
Yeah.
Wow, you are so generous and so wise, and this is exactly why we love hosting you. And I just already can't wait for the next time we're all together. And no one's leaving. Everybody's here because
That or they're doing laundry when the things are anyway. Uh,
so many good things to share. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for the time that you've given us tonight. Thank you, Tom Kim, for being with us.
Thanks,
And
Tom.
this is where we go hug the kids. So we're going to
that's
go.
right.
Thanks.
Yeah.